All right, the bags are packed. I've got a plane ticket here. We are going to the World SLA conference and you're invited. So get your bags and let's go. All right, so what is this conference, you may be asking yourself? Well, this is a little something we put on every year where we bring together teachers and linguists and researchers from all around the world, and we come together and we share ideas, all sorts of theories and ideas that all are trying to answer this one question, which is, how do people learn languages? I'm super excited to go. I can't wait for you to join us for this conference. It's going to be awesome. Once we get to the conference, the first thing you're going to do is be able to go meet your team. So we are going to break up into different teams. There's going to be Team Skinner, Team Chomsky, Team Krashen, Team Himes and Halliday, and all of these teams represent an actual theorist from the last century, including B.F. Skinner, Noam Chomsky, Stephen Krashen, and last but not least, Del Himes and Michael Halliday. And so the first thing you're going to be able to do at the conference is go and meet your team. We've organized some breakout sessions where everyone can get into different rooms with their teams and start sharing notes and ideas about how people learn languages according to your theorist and his ideas. And the idea is that you'll be able to collaborate and learn from one another, teach each other, because all of you are going to bring something new to the table and a slightly different perspective or understanding about your team's theorist. But this isn't just for fun, this is all leading up to tonight's main event, which is going to be a panel discussion between all the different teams. And each of you is going to have a turn to make a short presentation about your theorist and what they believed about language learning. So there's going to be all kinds of terms and names and ideas thrown around at this conference, but here's something that you can do to help you remember the names of our main theorists. So first we have B.F. Skinner. So anytime you hear someone say Skinner, I want you to do this. I want you to pinch your arm and say skin, Skinner. All right, so when me or someone else says Skinner, you're going to say skin, Skinner. Our next theorist is Noam Chomsky. And so the way we're going to help ourselves remember his name is that whenever somebody says Chomsky, you're going to say chomp, Chomsky. Okay, just think about it like an alligator. Chomp, Chomsky. Now our third theorist is Stephen Krashen, and he has a lot of different ideas, all kinds of them. He's a genius, and his hair kind of reflects that if you look back at his old videos. So for him, we're going to call him crazy-haired Krashen. When somebody says Krashen, I want you to say crazy-haired Krashen. And finally, we have the team Himes and Halliday. And you'll see that a lot of their theories have to do with talking and communicating and being social, and they have a social view of what language is used for. And so for them, the way we're going to remember Himes and Halliday is to say, holla, Himes and Halliday, holla. So let's review those real quick. We have 4 teams. We have Skin, we have Chomp, we have Crazy Haired, and we have Holla. Try using those little tricks to help you remember the different theorists' names and to help you differentiate your theorists' ideas from the ideas of the other teams and their theorists. Now, before you show up at the conference, there's some key terms we should cover so that way you're aware of them, because you might hear them a few times during the conference. The first term you might hear is L1 or L2. And L1 simply stands for your first language or your native language, whereas L2 stands for second language. Now, in reality, many people know more than 2 languages, so for them, they're L2. It could be their 3rd language, their 4th language. It doesn't really matter which it is. L2 simply means your target language. So if you have an ESL class in the United States, for example, you could have many different students, all with their own L1. They all have their own first language, but they're all coming together to learn the same L2. Their target language is English in this example. So that's L1 and L2. You might hear that. It's also a great way to have a shorthand way of taking notes. So if you're taking notes, rather than writing out first language and second language, you can simply write L1, L2. It'll save you a little bit of time when you're taking your notes. Now, speaking of second languages, another term you're going to hear a lot of is SLA. And SLA stands for Second Language Acquisition. It's basically a fancy way of saying language learning. But you'll notice we didn't use the word learning, we used the word acquisition. So let's talk about these 2 terms, learning and acquisition. We all have an idea of what learning looks like. It may be a teacher standing in front of a whiteboard, teaching individual ideas, right? That's what we think of when we think of teaching and learning. But then what is acquisition? Well, in language learning, to acquire a language means to pick it up, to pick up the pieces of the language and to learn it subconsciously without even trying or without even focusing on your learning. So in a traditional example of teaching and learning, the student's learning happens consciously. The teacher stands at the board, tells me what I need to know, and I learn it. And I know that I'm learning it as it's happening. This is the traditional way that we learn inside classrooms, inside schools. But acquisition is a little different. In acquisition, the learning happens subconsciously. If I'm acquiring new language, I may not even be aware that that process is happening. And I can give you an example of this. A few years ago, my family and I, we were in Iceland. And as I walked around the city, there were certain words that started to become familiar to me. Now, I didn't have an Icelandic language teacher, but there were certain words while I was there that kind of just clicked. All of a sudden, I kind of knew or had an idea of what those words meant. One of those was the word Thingvellir, which is the name of a famous landmark there near the capital city of Iceland. And I had already worked out that the word thing meant some kind of gathering or assembly of the people, and that all thing meant a gathering of all the people. But what was this new word, Thingvellir? What did that word mean? Now, I didn't have a teacher, but I was able to make a guess. Well, Vellir sounded kind of like the word valley, and so I had an idea. Maybe Vellir means something to do with landscape and land. Maybe it means valley. And it turns out I was pretty close. Thingvellir meant the gathering fields or the valley where the people meet. I didn't have a teacher, but I was able to pick up those pieces of the language and make sense of them for myself. And maybe you have examples of this too that you can think back to, where suddenly some part of this new language just kind of clicked for you. One of our theorists for this week, Stephen Krashen, he describes acquisition that way, that it's that moment when you're so caught up in the language that you forget that this new language is not your L1, it's not your first language. That's the moment that you're acquiring the language. When have you been so caught up in the new language that all of a sudden it started clicking, you're able to make sense of those pieces, regardless of whether you have a teacher or not? That might be a good example of when you were acquiring the language. And so finally, that's really what this conference is about. The World SLA Conference is about splitting these hairs between learning and acquisition to understand, how do people acquire language, and is there a thing we can do as teachers to help in that process? We have these ideas of how teachers can help students learn, of how I can stand at a whiteboard and teach them things. But what is the role of a teacher that's helping their students acquire language? Perhaps now my role looks more like a facilitator rather than a teacher. Maybe rather than pointing to the whiteboard and showing them exactly what they need to learn, maybe I'm just helping them see the pieces of the language and pick it up and make sense of it for themselves. Right, so we're going to be able to talk more about the implications of all these ideas later when we get to teaching methods. But for now, this lesson is about second language acquisition. How do people learn or acquire languages? And what does that mean for us today? So that's what the conference is about, and I can't wait to see you guys there.